Murder Homes is a production of iHeart Podcasts.
8:57 this morning, we come into this room, Matt. It is now 10:13. I'm not real good at math, so I'll just round things off. 8:57, 9:57, not quite 10:57. So we're just over an hour, 15 minutes.
In a cramped interrogation room at the Knox County Sheriff's Department in Mount Vernon, Ohio, two detectives are trying to get an unemployed tree trimmer named Matthew Hoffman to talk about three people who have vanished from a home at 481 King Beach Drive. They take turns trying to make him talk, but no matter what team of detectives are in the room, he says nothing, and they're starting to run out of patience.
And those people have gone through hell more and more in the last hour and 15 minutes we have sat here, Matt, because you are controlling their lives. You are controlling the strings of these people's hearts.
They try the soft approach.
I understand you're upset. I can see it in your face. You're not even looking at me, and that's cool. But I can tell that you're upset.
They try the good cop, bad cop approach.
I guess I don't understand you at all. I don't understand the shit you did.
He obviously didn't do it, or he would be telling us where the rest of them are. Gary, you're misunderstanding Matthew.
Well, you know what? You want to play this little game and act like a hard ass, okay? You don't want to tell us where Cody is, okay? You don't want to tell us where the girls are. Well, won't you tell us how you killed the dog?
And finally, the I know you're awake approach.
Matthew, I saw you move your lips, okay? I mean, I know you hear what I'm saying. Why are you playing this game?
Because he is awake. His eyes are open. Sometimes he'll lean his head on the metal interrogation desk, then lean back again, swallow hard, stare right through the two detectives facing him as if they weren't there at all. After 2 days of interrogation, 10 hours and 16 minutes of almost complete silence, they are in the interrogation room again. For a change, they try a little small talk, hardly expecting him to answer. They ask him what he's had for breakfast at the county jail. He answers in a soft, flat voice.
Generic Cheerios, 1 packet of sugar. Is that 1 pint or half pint of milk, double carton?
Yeah.
And a plain bagel with nothing on it, just a bagel.
He even throws in a tinge of irony. After hours and hours of silence, it's like the detectives have been zapped with a cattle prod. They nod at each other excitedly, lean forward, pat his knee, and wait for all his anguish and self-hatred to come pouring out. But instead, Hoffman thoughtfully sips the coffee they have brought for him, holds it between his hands, and goes silent again. It will be another week before he finally tells them where he's buried the dismembered bodies of the mother, the son, her best friend, and the family dog, and what really took place at 481 King Beach Drive. This is Murder Homes. I'm Matt Marinovich. You've seen a house like 481 King Beach Drive in Howard, Ohio 100 times before. Maybe Google Maps has routed you through some suburban cul-de-sac, and you picture living there for a moment. It is one of those forgettable raised ranch homes on a sloping lawn that needs a fresh coat of gray paint, a kid's empty swing set nearby. Someone's made an effort to keep a few potted plants alive, sweep the leaves away from the garage door. Just type in 481 King Beach Drive and you'll see it. The house where 3 people lost their lives pops up on Zillow, Trulia, and Redfin, even though it was just recently sold again a couple of months ago. In the photographs, it looks like any starter home. There's a brand new stove and refrigerator, 4 ceiling fans to keep the kitchen and living room cool on a stifling summer day. Brand new wall-to-wall carpeting in the 2 bedrooms. A shower curtain tastefully pulled over the bathtub in the master bedroom. Every room vacuumed and mopped, except for a small pool of water on the concrete floor of the basement. It's so unexceptional in many ways that you wonder why a troubled loner who lived 10.3 miles away found it at all. But take a closer look at that garage door with the 8 small windows. Back on November 9th, 2010, Matthew Hoffman, age 30, was slowly driving around Howard, Ohio, looking for a home to burglarize. Then he noticed something specific about 481 King Beach Drive. The garage door didn't quite close. There were 2 inches of visible space between the poured concrete floor and the edge of the garage door, just enough space to get his hand under. The simplest, most innocuous things can lead to the most sickening crimes. If Tina Herman's garage door had fully closed, as you can clearly see it does now in pic number 30 on Zillow, Matthew Hoffman would have sped up in his dented Toyota Yaris and found a weak spot somewhere else. But Hoffman had an eye for details. He had finally found the right place. After a short break, we'll find out what happened next. We're back with Murder Homes. In 2010, a 32-year-old woman named Tina Herman, her boyfriend, and 2 young kids, Sarah and Cody, ages 11 and 13, lived at 481 King Beach Drive. The broken garage door was the result of a fight she'd had with her boyfriend, who'd kicked it after they argued one night. At 3:40 a.m. on November 10th, Tina's boyfriend left for work at a distribution center 30 miles away. Tina listened to him drive away and went back to sleep. They agreed to break up, and she needed to get a little rest because her best friend, Stephanie Sprang, was coming by early in the morning to help her find a new place to live. Tina fell back asleep, with no idea that her house was being watched in the dark. Meanwhile, Matthew Hoffman was lying in wait in the woods on the other side of King Beach Drive. The sound of the car leaving had awakened him from a light sleep. He crawled out of his sleeping bag and took a sip of water. Instead of going back to sleep, he watched the home carefully, even though it would still be 3 more hours before the sun came up. This is the thing about Hoffman. He got a thrill from invading homes that weren't his. It was the only time he really felt alive. Everything else was difficult for him: relationships, communication, simple small talk, holding down a job. He had just been fired from his job as a tree trimmer, and the car he drove was going to be repossessed. Recently, his girlfriend had moved out after he tried to choke her. He was also working on a serious criminal record. Out west, he invaded a home when the owner was away, stole an odd assortment of property, and then tried to burn it to the ground. He spent 8 years in jail and was a model prisoner, but he had started to fall back on bad habits. There's something else that's extremely odd about Hoffman too, but we'll get to that later. As the sun came up, Hoffman rolled up the sleeping bag and sat perfectly still. He had this capability of sitting as still as a statue. Sometimes he would perch in the tree outside his decrepit home and sit there for hours watching the neighbors. The neighbors had started to keep their distance from him. He had even built a hammock way up in an elm tree, as if he were more comfortable there than in his own home. That morning, hidden by leaves again, he watched the 2 kids, Sarah and Cody, leave the home and step onto a school bus. Sometime before 9 a.m., Tina Herman left the home as well, backing her car out of the garage. It closed, but not completely. There was still that 2-inch gap. Hoffman watched the bright sunlight glint off the roof of her car until it disappeared. Then he walked across the road, gripped the bottom edge of the garage door, and hauled it up. He was finally inside 481 King Beach Drive, where he stood in the garage listening for the sound of anyone else in the home. But there was only the sound of the dog barking upstairs. So he slipped on a pair of sure-grip gloves and opened the basement door, his footsteps soundless on the plush carpeting. The dog let out a worried whine and scurried away as soon as it saw him. A pot of drip coffee sat near the sink, an unfinished glass of orange juice on the kitchen table, a list of chores that Tina had quickly written out. Hoffman hadn't stolen anything yet, and he also didn't leave. It's as if subconsciously something had shifted and he was already on a low boil. Meanwhile, Tina was shopping at the Kroger supermarket in Mount Vernon. After getting some gas, she headed home to meet her best friend Stephanie, who was going to pick her up to help her look at apartments. With things on the rocks with her boyfriend, she needed to find a new place to live, even though 481 King Beach had finally started to feel like a real home for her kids. But as soon as Tina re-entered her home, carrying 2 bags of groceries, a man came running toward her down the hallway and grabbed her. Only 120 pounds, Tina didn't stand a chance against Matthew Hoffman. Investigators would later determine he had most likely already begun stabbing her before he was interrupted by the arrival of her friend Stephanie. Stephanie had found the front door open and heard screams from her friend, but instead of running away, she ran into the house to defend Tina. Hoffman attacked her, stabbing her to death. Then he furiously turned his attention to Tina again. In just a few minutes, it was all over. But the family dog wouldn't stop its steady, high-pitched barking, so Hoffman methodically walked toward it, hunting knife in hand. It was a clear blue autumn day, not a cloud in the sky. The chill in the air was just beginning to wear off. But inside 481 King Beach Drive, Hoffman was heaving breaths. Finally, the home was completely silent again, the way it was when he first walked in. A murder home is almost always 2 things: the place a family feels safest and the last place on earth they expect to be hunted down. Detectives determined that Hoffman dragged Tina's body to the master bathroom first, then Stephanie's, then the dog's, where in Hoffman's own words he, quote, processed them with his hunting knife, wrapping the body parts in garbage bags. Meanwhile, at the Knox County Middle School, Cody and his older sister Sarah were in the midst of a normal school day, unaware of what had happened. At the end of the day, they took the school bus back home. They got off the school bus and walked up the short, winding flagstones to the front door. Once in the house, they began to take their shoes off, but saw blood right next to the door. They called out to their mother. She didn't greet them, which was strange. They noticed the groceries spilled all over the floor. Cody screamed first when he saw the intruder, dressed in black, and then the boy ran as fast as he could to the front door of 481 King Beach Drive. He even managed to open it before he was dragged back inside and stabbed. No one heard his scream or Sarah's scream as Hoffman grabbed a phone from her and pulled her to the floor. Hoffman tied Sarah up with electrical cord from a ceiling fan and gagged her. Then he pulled a pillowcase over her head, leaving her lying on the kitchen floor. Even Hoffman will later confess that he didn't know why he didn't stab her. All he can say is that he had a sudden impulse not to. Sarah heard banging sounds in the bathroom from her position on the floor. Hoffman would come out and open the refrigerator or a cabinet looking for cleaning supplies, and then he would continue to labor in the bathroom until the sun started to go down. Finally, Hoffman returned, blindfolded her, and led her to Stephanie's Jeep. In court more than a year later, Hoffman's lawyer would turn to Tina's surviving relatives and say that his client only wanted to rob the home, but investigators would deny that. Instead, they believed that something evolved in his mind as he wandered through a house that wasn't his, something that compelled him to murder innocent people. I talked with Dr. Judith Joseph, a board-certified psychiatrist and a behavioral science researcher who works with people like Hoffman. I asked how someone's intentions could change from burglary to murder, and then kidnapping so quickly.
We know that a lot of times people who are psychopathic, there are baby steps. They have conduct disorder in childhood, so they do things that are priming their brains to be aroused by violence. So they'll kill animals, they'll kill insects, they'll set fires, they'll steal. Those are all the type of foreplay that lead to adult deviant behavior that classifies as psychopathy. So, if you look at the DSM criteria for conduct disorder, you're going to see a list of behaviors that are red flags. And I use these assessments every day because I do clinical research, because we want to rule out people who meet criteria for conduct disorder, because guess what? Those people end up meeting criteria for antisocial personality disorder in adulthood. So it's these categories of behaviors that are deviant, that are not typical, that are actually red flags for harmful behaviors that we see. Those categories of behaviors make you likely to meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder in adulthood. And we know antisocial personality disorder leads to what people know as psychopathy.
We'll be back after a short break to find out what happened next to Sarah. We're back with Murder Homes. The following day, November 11th, Tina's boyfriend returned home after spending the night with a friend. He found the door unlocked, the house empty, but bloodstains everywhere. Police arrived immediately, and the ritual that's familiar with every murder home began. Neighbors whispered to each other in small groups as the home was taped off. Detectives arrived and left the home in 2s and 3s. Then came the satellite truck from local news station WCMH. It was another beautiful blue autumn day. Yellow leaves fell from the beech trees on the other side of King Beach Drive. But an entire family was missing, leaving nothing behind but the signs of a violent struggle. And detectives were sure there was at least one survivor because there were 2 sets of bloody sneaker prints leading down to the garage. All day, cars slowly passed by the unmarked police vehicles on the side of the road. One of those was the silver Toyota driven by Hoffman. In the trunk of his car, there were more cleaning supplies he had purchased at a nearby Walmart and a can of gas. He had meant to return and burn the home to the ground the night before. But when Tina's boyfriend had returned, that plan went out the window. As the adrenaline rush faded, Hoffman had lost interest in all the details he had cared about so intensely just hours before. In his rearview mirror, he looked at the faces of the horrified neighbors, and then drove to his home at 49 Columbus Road, 20 minutes away, where he had chained Sarah to a bed of leaves in the basement. The house was covered with dead leaves. Rows and rows of plastic bags filled with them hung on the walls. On the living room floor, a 14 by 14-foot tarp covered a pile of leaves 3 feet high. The bathroom alone was covered with 110 bags of leaves. If 481 King Beach Drive seemed like a real home, 49 Columbus was the exact opposite. It reeked of mildew and mold. There was no heat. The stench of rotting, dried leaves was everywhere. This is the other odd thing about Matthew Hoffman. He had a thing about leaves. In fact, in psychiatric terms, he suffered from dendrophilia, a sexual attraction to trees. I asked Dr. Judith Joseph, who treats people like Hoffman, about paraphilias and dendrophilia specifically.
So when we think about sexual attraction, we think about being attracted to a consenting adult. Paraphilias are not typical. So you can have benign sexual attractions that are not traditional, such as masochistic, sadistic sexual behaviors. We don't want to pathologize those type of intimate relationships and those type of intimate sexual behaviors because they're not pathological. They're consensual. They just don't happen to be typical. Then there are the harmful sexual interactions and attractions, such as pedophilia, which is non-consensual sexual behavior with a minor, right? That is harmful. That is not okay. And it is not typical. And then people have the more common voyeurism. Those are more common. They're not okay either. They're not typical, but things that are not as extreme as people who have sexual interactions with animals, right? That's not safe. That's not empathic. And that's a paraphilia. Or in this case, sexual arousal and interactions and behaviors with inanimate objects like trees. So they may view leaves or parts of trees as being sexual or have romantic feelings around those things. And so that is an atypical sexual arousal.
His house was lined with thousands of pounds of dead leaves in plastic bags. Hundreds of pounds of leaves were covered by a tarp on the floor. I'm trying to understand how it's a sexual thing.
The sexual part of it is more about being basically turned on, right? So, it's possible that when he was trimming those trees, in his brain, the connections that were being lit up were lighting up the genitalia. So pruning that tree is equivalent likely to kissing, right? But his brain likely wasn't set up to think of kissing as foreplay. So for his brain, foreplay may have been trimming those trees. If someone who's married goes out and buys roses and sprinkles those roses on a bed, that's their type of foreplay. His type of foreplay may have been putting those leaves on the bed, putting those leaves on the floor. It's priming the brain for what's next.
There's security footage of Matthew Hoffman walking through a Walmart. It is very ordinary. It's at night. He's picked up heavy-duty contractor garbage bags, tarp, and a turkey sandwich. But being a little ADD, he's also selected a Halloween t-shirt from the bargain bin. On sale, because it's 2 weeks after the holiday. He'd feel a little more at home in a world where the holiday lasted all year long. In his bathroom, he's even drawn a jack-o'-lantern's mouth around the faucet. In between the terrible things he does, Hoffman always seems as if he's adrift. Each decision he makes seems arbitrary, as if he were floating hopelessly through life, barely in control. The only exceptional thing about him, in the end, is his sudden capacity for violence, whether it's killing and skinning squirrels in his yard, setting a house on fire, or murdering a family. Sarah was talking to police at the Knox County Sheriff Department, with Hoffman seated just a few rooms away. After 3 interrogation sessions in which Hoffman still refused to say a word, he was handcuffed and led out of the interrogation room. In the hallway, off camera, he began speaking to the detective who hadn't been able to extract one word out of him. In a soft, flat voice, he told the detective he had a terrible dream. He was cutting up bodies, body after body, cutting off limbs. There was so much blood, and he still had so much grisly work to do with his knife. He wanted the detective to let him run away, and made the detective promise he'd shoot him. "It doesn't work that way, Matthew," the detective said. Back in the interrogation room the next day, Hoffman went silent again when they asked him where the bodies were. They tried everything, asked him how he liked his coffee, watched him eat a cheeseburger, read a pleading text from his mother, but Matthew Hoffman didn't say a word or move an inch. The detectives left the room, and Hoffman stared straight at the camera, motionless again, as if he were willing himself to vanish for good inside himself, leaving nothing but the outer bark of his body behind. It would be days before they were able to coax the information they needed from him and got what they wanted, an X on a map. On a cold November afternoon, in 2 unmarked cars, detectives would pull off the highway onto a dusty road leading deep into the Kokosing wildlife area. There, a tree surgeon would start a chainsaw and cut a hole in a 70-foot-tall, hollowed-out beech tree. Piece by piece, he handed over the tightly wrapped remains of Tina, Stephanie, Cody, and the family dog. A procession of 3 white hearses would slowly drive down the same rural road a few hours later, gleaming in the winter sun. And what about Tina Herman's house on King Beach Drive, where all these grisly murders took place? For months, the house sat on the market. The news of the murders had spread wide, and no one was willing to touch it. After some time, the property owner for City Mortgage turned the house over to the local Habitat for Humanity chapter. Finally, 2 years after the murders and kidnapping, a family bought the home and tried to make it their own. And just this year, it changed hands again. Whether the people living there now know of its history or the House of Leaves remains unknown. As for Matthew Hoffman's home at 49 Columbus, it sold in 2021 for a steep discount. You can still view pictures of it on Zillow. This is Murder Homes. I'm Matt Marinovich. Thanks for listening. Murder Homes is a production of iHeart Podcasts. For more shows from iHeart Podcasts, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.